Good morning. This is Inside Television, and I'm thrilled to be here with Erica Gruen. Erica, how are you?
I'm great, Rick. It's great to be here with you.
Now, as the story about the inside of television goes, Erica is part of that story, and I think could very well be part of where television is going. But let's hear a little bit about how you got into this wacky business, and you had some landmark work a little bit later than that, so we'll hear about that as well. So how'd you get started here?
Well, I have a great story about how I got into television, and what makes it great, in my opinion, is that I had absolutely no background in television. I had uh, no experience and no skills to be hired to be the marketing director of Bravo as a startup cable network. I'd always wanted to work in television. I had a secret desire to work in television. Back in those days, if you didn't have an uncle at ABC, you weren't going to get a chance to work in television. So when Chuck Dolan offered me the opportunity to be part of this startup, and it was in the days when there were maybe 20% of U.S. homes had cable.
Right.
It was really 1980, very nascent. I actually joined Bravo in August of 1980. That was the same month that Ted Turner launched CNN. So it was really early on. There were only a handful of networks, and it was a big risk for me, for everybody who joined Cablevision in those days, because um, Rainbow Programming, which was what Bravo was part of, was the first networks that were targeted pay TV networks. There was HBO, there was Showtime, but nobody had thought of a network, and it was a network for the arts, which is why it's called Bravo. That was just going to be, orchestras, ballet, operas from around the world. Some of it originally produced, a lot of it, bought from various libraries, and nobody knew who it was. I didn't know what cable TV was. I went to the public library in my parents' hometown, which is where I was passing through at the time I got the job offer, to try to figure out what it was. And there were no articles, except for one article I remember in the database on CATV, which is community antenna television. That was it. So, I took this leap of faith, as did all of us that joined Rainbow Programming, and it was an amazing and wild ride. As I was, as I went around the country talking to cable operators and convincing them to carry Bravo on their lineups, from Minnesota to Texas to California to Florida, literally all over the country. And I just have to say I was a fortunate person, right? Classic thing, right place, right time. What I did was I took the leap and went for it. It just seemed to me an incredibly exciting idea, and something, as I said, I'd secretly wanted to do. And as I was later to find out, over the course of my life, I've taken a lot of leaps of faith like that. I'm an entrepreneurial mindset person at heart, and had a lot of faith that I could land on my feet, not necessarily borne out by actual facts that I would land on my feet, but I had that, one might say, inordinate confidence that things were going to be okay.
Right. From
And
Bravo, then you did what?
Well, so from Bravo, I actually went to work at a large ad agency called Dancer Fitzgerald Sample. I'm rewatching Mad Men right now. I don't know if last time you watched that show, but
All
Dancer.
those offices are where I worked in Manhattan and during my
So
days.
there you go. There you go. You'll hear them refer to Dancer every so often. That's Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, which was purchased by Saatchi and Saatchi when Saatchi came over here on a big buying spree from London, bought up a bunch of big ad agencies like Dancer and combined them all into one conglomerate. So within a few years, I was working at Saatchi and Saatchi, which was the world's largest ad agency at the time. I was hired to be the first full-time cable television expert for Dancer, which our clients were, big multinationals like Procter and Gamble, General Mills, Toyota, Haynes, which just goes to show you I had 2 years of experience in cable, and that made me an expert in 1982. Shortly after I came to the agency, I was given a couple of assignments. One was basically to create a branded entertainment, what we think of now as a branded entertainment group, to start a television programming division within the agency to
Okay.
produce programs for cable. And we ended up producing hundreds of hours of television, of Emmy award-winning television, primarily sponsored by Procter, actually.
Really?
I ran on Lifetime for many, many years, won a lot of Cable Ace Awards, Emmy Awards. And shortly after that, I was actually given an assignment to kind of follow what was happening in what we now think of as digital technologies. And I founded Saatchi and Saatchi Interactive as well. So it was one of the first digital ad agencies in the world. So I created and ran what we think of now as entrepreneurial ventures at Saatchi. I created these businesses, I ran them. Um, and I had a lot of exposure to basically every client in the Saatchi New York office. Um, and so I was thought, I mean, I had my reputation in the business was, she's a marketing person, she's an advertising person, she's a cable television person, she's a digital advertising person. I was seen as a kind of a polyglot in that way,
Okay.
which a generalist, which at the time I thought was, not great, but I come now to again to kind of looking back on it like that was my strength. People who are generalists can have that ability to put one idea and another idea together and come up with a third idea. Have that creative overview, not necessarily being pigeonholed in one set of skills. And so that was my beat for a number of years. I was at Saatchi for 14 years. Became a senior vice president, running, as I said, running these businesses, and thinking of new ways for large advertisers to reach new audiences, basically.
And then,
Well, and then, okay, so I'll tell you the kind of a longer version of Food Network story, which I kind of think is the fun version, which is because I was dabbling around in all these various areas of the business, I made a lot of friends in different areas. Okay. I like to make friends. I like to meet new people. Among the people that I became really good friends with was a fellow named George Babick, who actually had been the head of advertising for Ted Turner when Ted launched CNN and was at that time working for Tribune. So George was a good friend, and George introduced me to other people. We put together a dinner group that we called Media Salon, and we met every few weeks. Me and George, Jerry Laybourne would come by, John Mandel from one of the other big ad agencies would come by. And then one day, George brought one of his really good friends from CNN days, a fellow named Reese Schoenfeld. A lot of people know Reese. Reese actually was the
yes.
guy that Ted Turner hired when he wanted to launch CNN as a news network. Reese
Yeah.
was a very well-known news guy.
Yep.
And Reese put it together for Ted. And then, of course, he and Ted famously had a massive parting of the ways. Reese went on to do other things. So when we started this media salon, Reese came up with this idea. He brought it to Media Salon. Hey, guys, I've been talking to Providence Journal, and they have kind of an idea to, put a network together with Johnson and Wales Cooking School. And, what do you guys think? And we started batting this around for months. We helped Reese put together the idea of Food Network. And Reese brought George Babick in, not only to be head of advertising at Food Network, but George brought Tribune Broadcasting to be an investor in the network.
That's very
By the
important.
way, put a little asterisk on that. Tribune Broadcasting did get 10% of the Food Network. And what did they invest? They invested $10 million, and they pledged their retrans subs in the 5 major markets in which they operate. I won't go into retrans, but I'm assuming everybody in the audience
Yeah, yeah.
knows what retrans is. So that gave food, penetration in New York, LA, Chicago. I forget the other two markets, but and by the way, Tribune Broadcasting, or the Tribune Company, still owns 10% of the Food Network today for their original $10 million investment.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, George Babick. That was George's idea. He pulled Tribune in, kicking and screaming into that deal. They hated cable. George convinced them to do it. So fast forward. So Reese got the investors together. Providence Journal became a majority investor, Tribune as a minority investor. A bunch of the cable operators, Continental, Daniels, various others, Cox, also had tiny shares in the network as part of their deal to carry the network.
Yep, those deals were common back then.
Right, exactly. And Reese and others at Providence Journal, I am told, I wasn't there at the time, came up with the idea, this bright idea, that we're going to give the Food Network away for free to cable operators. We're not going to charge them one thin dime for 10 years, 10-year free affiliation agreements. And the provision for the 11th year, there was no provision for the 11th year. So the network was launched. It was the first cable network that I'm aware of, basic cable network, that launched with no affiliate revenue, zero. Why? Because Reese said the following, guys, I can put this network together for cheap. And how I'm going to do it is, and this is my interpretation, not Reese's. It's basically like CNN. So you take out anchor person, you put in chef. You take out anchor desk, you put in stove. You run it live for 24 hours a day in a studio.
Okay.
In an office building, not a real television studio. It's retrofitted with low ceilings and the worst production values. But that's okay because it's going to cost nothing, and we don't need affiliate revenue because we're going to get every cable operator in the country to cover it and carry it. And then all this money is going to flow in from Procter and Gamble and General Mills, and all these advertisers are going to advertise on this Food Network, and we're going to make a bundle of money, and we're going to do it for no cost.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there are several things that were wrong with that idea. And 2 years later, the owners of the network saw that there were a lot of things wrong with that idea, and they dismissed Reese. Okay. This is the short version of the story. They dismissed Reese and they hired me. And there were a couple things that were kind of unusual about that. One was that I had never run a cable network. The second thing was that no other woman had ever been a CEO of a cable network except for Kay Koplovitz.
Right.
Jerry Laybourne was president of Nickelodeon. She was never CEO. So that was kind of unusual. And I was hired out of a large ad agency. And I had a television background, but I was an unusual choice.
Okay.
And as I told you, I had inordinate beliefs in my own capabilities to tackle something I know nothing about and learn it as I go.
Yeah.
And I knew something about programming. I knew something about marketing. I knew something about affiliate relations because I had done that at Bravo.
Yeah.
I had friends among the cable operators because I had made it my business when I was at Saatchi to become friends with cable operators and heads of programming and CEOs of networks alike. So I think I had the rudiments, but I'd never run an organization that size. But what I did find out very quickly was just how bad things were at Food Network.
Mm.
Nobody really knew. The network was very close to going out of business, should have gone out of business, actually. And I'll tell you in a minute why it didn't. That would have made it one of only maybe one or two networks that ever launched and shut down. That would have been a really unusual thing to have happened. And I didn't really realize how bad it was, how the network was being held together with paper clips and bubble gum until I really got there and understood how desperate things were. So it wasn't just that there was very little money. There was $12 million, I think, at that time coming in from advertising. As I said, no money coming in from affiliate sales because there are affiliate sales.
Right. Those beautiful 10-year deals.
Yes, exactly. The beautiful 10-year deals. Well, what was worse was that nobody was watching the network because the network was unwatchable. It was unwatchable. I mean, and the few people that were watching it were, clearly had it on as background noise or something. I mean, it was literally there was no editing. It was a news show. That was the way Reese had watched it. There was no editing. There was no posting. There was nothing. It was just turn the cameras on and go. And half hour after half hour after half hour. And I remember saying, why are we running this as a news opera? It's not a news channel. Why aren't we just producing shows and running them, you know, 9, 10, 12, 27 times during the course of the year, the way every other network does. And that's
Right.
what I proceeded to do. Started, cut way back on the amount of programming, put more programming dollars per minute. Um, changed a bunch of things about the kinds of shows we were doing. Um, because it's television. The name of the game in television, you have to put on shows that people want to watch. Yes, there are all sorts of other things that go to the fundamentals, but you have to have a product that people want,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then you can start to tackle some of the fundamental financial problems that there's no money coming in. But by the time we'd made it successful, we were driving more revenue per dollar of programming spent than any other network in the television business. And the next network that was efficient on that metric was E, and they were spending twice the amount of money per dollar per viewer that we were. We just became very, very efficient. But we put on better shows. So the thing that kind of drove the network to its massive success was two things. One was we put a gigantic amount of the budget behind Emeril Lagasse,
Hmm.
a primetime show called Emeril Live that I conceived of as kind of the Johnny Carson of food. I conceived of Emeril as the Johnny Carson of food, gave him an opening monologue, gave him a band. Nobody had ever seen a cooking show with a band. At that time, this was highly innovative, a highly original idea.
Yep.
But it was because Emeril had that kind of big personality.
He did have a big personality.
So that was the first thing. We put it all behind Emeril. I think it was like 20% of the total programming budget behind that one show. Ran the hell out of it. It was every night.
Yep.
In fact, by the time Emeril Lagasse's show concluded, long after I left the network, I think he was on 10 or 12 years in prime time every single night. The only other television personality that I know that had that kind of longevity was Larry King on CNN. That show was the franchise, and you needed a show that like that to be the franchise. Emeril built the Food Network, really, he did. But the second thing that we did was really completely changed the whole, I guess you would call it the branding of the network. When I came to the network, you could describe it as the network for people who cook.
Okay.
And my thought was, why can't we be the network for everyone who loves to eat? Food is not something that you make, like a sweater. Food is something that you create to serve to people you love. I mean, who makes an elaborate meal or learns an elaborate recipe for themselves?
Right.
You do it because of, you're serving to people you love. It's a celebration. It's a picnic. It's a graduation party. Food is part of the fabric of people's lives. So let's celebrate that. And so that led us to all sorts of other crazy programming ideas that nobody would have done before. We licensed the Two Fat Ladies from the BBC, which was this very funny show. We started doing cooking competitions. And then my husband was watching Time Warner Cable in Queens, where we lived, one day, and pulled me into the room and said, you gotta see this show. This is like one of your competition shows, but it's on speed. And that show was The Iron Chef, which was running on Time Warner Cable in Queens in the Japanese version, because they ran a lot of programming for this, multi-ethnic area of New York City, Queens, with 147 languages or whatever. There were like 3 hours of Japanese programming every day. And my husband found The Iron Chef. And that's how Iron Chef came to be. We licensed it from NHK. They dubbed it. And those were the kinds of shows we were seeking out. That was what we were trying to communicate. And I would say, to your remarks when you started this, why is Food Network still Food Network, and why is MTV fallen off? Food Network is Food Network because if you wanted to describe the branding of the Food Network today, I think you'd say it's the network for everyone who loves to eat. I mean, that positioning hit home in a really big, big way. And it changed everything about food in the United States, really. You wouldn't have farm to table, you wouldn't have sustainability, you wouldn't have veganism, you wouldn't have any of these ideas about food if you never had the Food Network. The Food Network was this popularizer of this idea that food is part of culture, you know, that food has an important role in people's lives. I mean, the people who are running farm to table and running veganism today were watching Emerald when they were 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 years old. And I know that. I know that because I have conversations with them all the time. And that show had a huge appeal to children, huge appeal. Kids loved Emerald. And he influenced an entire, you know, he influenced all the millennials, the Gen Zs, you know, that whole group of people who are now adults who, you know, learn that food is fun, you know? So, you know, there's a lot to talk about in terms of that. I mean, there's a lot to say about food and how we did it, but I would say that it was tapping into this fundamental idea that we weren't going to run a 24/7 news show and survive. And by the way, the sidebar on the reason the network didn't shut down, actually, even while I mean, this took about 18 months or so to affect this turnaround. But at the very beginning, when I came onto the network, I found out that the network had run out of money. The Tribune wasn't putting in any more money. Providence Journal didn't have any more money to put in. They were looking for bank financing. They were not going to get bank financing. There was nothing to finance. And they were going to have to close it. But at that moment, the Belo Corporation headquartered in Dallas, announced that they were buying the Providence Journal company.
Yep.
They didn't want Food Network. They wanted Providence Journal's local television stations.
Yep, sure.
But that saved the Food Network because Belo decided to keep the lights on long enough to find a buyer, and they were the ones who brought in scripts to buy the network. Without Belo buying Providence Journal would have been forced to close the Food Network. They would have had to do it. There was no more money to keep it going.
All right. So what I find intriguing is that you took, in reality, a fairly universal activity, eating and cooking, and you made it cool and you made it fun, but it still resonated with people because they kind of said, oh, I do that. That's something I do every day. I eat that. I'd love to eat that. I don't know if I can cook that, but I'd love to eat that. Now, in today's television world, which we are turned upside down so many times we don't even remember, we have things like music television that hasn't run music in a decade, the History Channel that I defy you to actually find anything on it about history, the Learning Channel that I've never understood what the Learning Channel is, and on and on and on. You have a lot of programs, a lot of networks which you could call, wasn't the phrase high concept? Where, you know, it's pretty easy to identify what it ought to be, and they're nowhere close to that. Now, understanding that the distribution models have changed dramatically, could what you did with the Food Network work with, before we got started, MTV, music television? Could we turn, and we, the global we, not the poor people at Paramount who have to deal with it,
Right.
we turn MTV into something that would actually appeal again?
Well, no, I don't. I think
Okay, that's an honest answer.
no, I know, and the reason is the day of branded cable networks is over.
Okay, but forget that it's a cable network.
Oh,
Concentrated on it being a brand. Okay? The brand of MTV doesn't have to mean channel 336 on my DirecTV box. Okay?
right.
It's the brand of MTV and or the brand, forget about Discovery, the brand of the history. Stick with MTV. MTV is a brand of being all things music. I mean, people refer to MTV when they say, oh, it's like an MTV. I've got a client who's going to do an MTV for social media. as a
Mhm.
place that's a home for everything that you want to see, kind of rotate it around so anytime you turn it on, there's something cool to watch that hits your goals.
Well, I think the issue there is that the way people watch television is not channel oriented anymore.
That's right. They're watching programs, but
They
they
watch
need to find the program, which is, I think,
all
maybe
that.
where the brand can come in, right? It's impossible to find stuff now.
Well, right. I couldn't agree with you more. I complain about this every single night. My husband would ratify this. He's like, why can't we just get an easy way to find something to watch? Um, it used to be that people would watch a channel, you'd watch one show, then you'd watch another show, then you'd watch another show. Lead in was really
We
important. Lead
call
up,
that audience flow in prime time.
audience flow. Exactly. Lead in, lead out, and figuring out, you know, what shows belong on your network and how they fit the brand. People don't watch television like that anymore. I
No,
mean,
that's
and
linear. Literally, that's linear TV, one after another after another.
that's right. So, you know, what's the most popular channel on television? The most popular channel on television is YouTube. And, um, you know, one might think, well, you could think of YouTube as a collection of thousands and thousands and thousands and millions, maybe, of channels that are all built around a personality or built around a topic, you know, um, little mini sub channels all
Yep.
consolidated into YouTube,
Yep.
right? But people don't watch in a linear fashion, you know, on YouTube. They go down rabbit holes, maybe. I wouldn't call that a channel, but they go down a rabbit hole for a while, and then they skip around and they're watching short form, and they're not necessarily watching
But they're
long.
talking about it with their friends. One way or t'other, they're sharing. I just found a fun rabbit hole, right? I mean, some variation of that still exists.
Yes. I mean, I actually had an interesting conversation recently with someone who's, you know, trying to start basically a YouTube, you know, food, personality driven
Yep.
food channel.
Yep.
Um, you know, collection of different personalities under one banner. Um, I'm just, you know, I really have no idea how one builds audiences or, you know, builds enough um, visibility to attract new audiences and then holds on to audiences. And, you know, in this kind of environment, I'd have to say that's, you know, I'm not the right,
You don't have the answers to that
I don't have the
because
answers.
I got to tell you, it just broke my heart. And I spent 12 years at Showtime competing to the death with HBO. Okay. We were the white hats, they were the black hats. But it broke my heart when they put HBO down inside something called Max.
I know.
You know, I'm see right there. Okay. It would appear that we do still have brands that could be used to bring in audiences. We just haven't figured out how to do it.
Well, that might be the case. Although we have to be really, you know, really careful not to allow nostalgia to creep in because
I know, and I have clients who are launching streaming channels, and I tell them unapologetically, take whatever financial forecast you have for the first year and cut it in half, and then cut that in half. Not the financial, the revenue forecast. Cut it in half and then cut that in half. And if you can still find a way to make the thing work, very carefully give it a try. But
yeah. I mean, there are a couple of niches that perennially are going to do. I mean, golf, anything. There's
golf anything.
always going to be endemic advertising that's going to support golf. You know,
Yep.
there's always going to be endemic advertising that's going to support race cars. That's, you know, going to support high end of, you know, luxury good kinds of things. There's always going to be a way to support programming, certain very, you know, specific niches like that. Um, but something more, you know, something further afield. You know, food is not a great example because indeed, you know, indeed it was, you would think that, oh yeah, all these packaged goods advertisers would support Food Network. Yes, they would, and they did, but at the lowest possible CPMs.
Right.
The way we made Food Network financially viable. And by the way, we actually did bring it into the black on cash flow, which was the only cable network in history to go cash flow positive on just advertising revenue.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
but the way we did that was by completely changing the audience mix. When I got there, it was women 55 plus. When I left, it was adults 25 to 54. So now we could attract automotive advertising and tech advertising and travel advertising.
Advertising not related to flour that you put in the cake.
Exactly.
And that's what you had previously.
Exactly.
All right.
So,
Well,
yeah.
listen, we're about out of time, but I think there are lessons inside your Food Network story. And I think they are germane to what we're dealing with now. So I appreciate your telling that to our audience, and I appreciate your time.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you for the
very much.
opportunity. Great
Okay.
talking.
Bye bye.